they would greet people in their territory. So Gaelic Hasla. I noticed in the program, it says that in front of my name, it says welcome. And I just want to point out to you that that's not in my wheelhouse to welcome you to these lands, because this isn't my original home. I'm originally from northern Saskatchewan, a little Métis village of Buffalo Narrows. And so if I was living there, I would welcome you. But I can't do that here because it's not my territory. And so I wish I had seen this sooner. So I also wish that I had a magic pencil that I could erase the word welcome and put instead right in land acknowledgement. So that's what I'm here to do today. And I'm scrolling. For this is truly what I've been asked to do here today. It aligns with the 94 calls to action that are outlined in the Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner's Report of 2015. So I want to thank the organizing committee for making room for this important work to be done today. And so I'll invite you to join in this next moment, and to the people that are on the Zoom, hi. Please join with us as well as we together acknowledge the original inhabitants of this land, the Pentlatch, the Aïkson, and the Comox First Peoples, whose ancestors have lived in accordance with and cared for and guarded these lands with their lives. They've been here for a long time, and it is such a pleasure and a treasure to breathe and live and grow here, and I thank you. And I know that John held this sentiment as well. He loved living here, and he rolled with a humble curiosity in Indigenous ways of being. And I super love that about him. I witnessed this in the stories that we shared and the questions that he would ask me when I shared about my life or my goings on in the world. And so he would be very pleased to know that this call to action was acted upon for his celebration of his life. Hey, thank you. Oh, and I'm gonna light the candle. And I can't maybe speak that very loud away from the microphone. But when I go out into the schools and I open circles for kids, I do drumming and singing and storytelling and whatnot. After my traditional introduction, I light a candle. So when I saw the candle up here and I saw the matches, I really appreciated it because it goes to our Indigenous, our human being, our rites of passage. It speaks to our pre-Indigenous birth teachings in that each of us have a spark inside ourselves. And what I say to the kids, and I'll share with you today, is that spark is what we are created from, a big flame that the Creator created when it was time for the human beings to arrive here on this earth. All the physical preparations were made, and then in the spirit world, the Creator prepared a big flame. And then from this flame, a spark would fly up, and I pictured all of those sparks becoming each one of us as a human being, and this is global. So through that spark, when I light the candle, we know that we're connected through that flame. And so when you hear we're all my relations at the end of an opening or a prayer in our ways of being, you might hear in Gaelic Hasla, Namwayut, meaning we are all one. Or in Cree, we say Kakudani Totamak, all my relations. And it signifies us back, it returns all of us back to our source. And so when the candle gets lit, it's a representation and a symbol of that flame and our connection to each other. So I'm going to light the candle. Oh, and I also like to say, with the kids, get all your blinks out so you don't miss when the match strikes the, whatever this paper is, sandpaper, and that perhaps you may have missed the spark, seeing the spark. Some of you up close may have heard the spark. Eventually you'll smell it. And so that, that unites us. So thank you for that. Whoever brought the candle, I can't remember your name, but I really love seeing you here today. So thank you for this privilege. Thank you, Doug. Hey, I'll get my stuff out of your way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mavis. And for those of you online, if you weren't able to hear that, Mavis was explaining to us the significance of lighting the candle and the spark that brings us all together. I want to at this time acknowledge that we have some members of John's family. We're honored to have them with us today. And I just want to acknowledge John's brother, Don Higginbotham. Welcome, Don. And we also have John's niece, Anita Adams, and her husband, Tom, and her children, Danielle and Brennan. Thanks so much for being with us today, and we hope that our presence is going to bring honor to John and be meaningful for you as well as all of us. Thanks so much. I also want to acknowledge, is John's cousin Diane here, Diane Valentine? Pardon? She's on Zoom. Okay, welcome, Diane. We're glad to have you with us virtually. Life is like a song. It has crescendos and rhythm, a beginning, middle, and end. Threshold choirs take this metaphor literally and use it to honor the ancient tradition of offering kindness made audible with compassionate a cappella voices at many thresholds of life. Threshold choirs celebrate and affirm the beauty, dignity, and wholeness of all people and believe that everyone deserves to be treated with kindness from their first to their last breath. Our singers today are members of Pure Joy Threshold Singers from Quadra Island, Campbell River, and the Comox Valley Threshold Choir. No need to applaud, but if you're so moved, that's fine too.
Thank you, Mavis. That was so lovely. Thank you for inviting me. This is the only song I'm going to introduce. It's called Bright Sky, and it was written by Melanie Moore. There are 3 verses. In the first verse, we are singing to you, John's loved ones and friends. In the second verse, John is singing to you, his loved ones and friends. In the third verse, we are singing to John. We are lifting John to the bright blue sky.
We are holding you as his soul flies by. So much love we send to your heart tonight as he flies so high, so free.
I am lifting up to the bright blue sky.
I am loving you as my soul flies by. In the stars I'll be, will you think of me? As I fly so high, so free. We are lifting you to the brightest sky. We are letting you know as your soul flies by. In our hearts you'll stay throughout all our days. May you fly so high, so free. May you fly so high, so free. This family, your heart, watch over all their loved ones. Help the children make their way and hold them in the arms of grace. Hold this family in your heart, watch over all their loved ones. Help the children make their way and hold them in the arms of grace. Hold this family in your heart, watch over all their loved ones. Help the children make their way and hold them in the arms of grace. Hold this family in your heart, watch over all their loved ones. Help the children make their way and hold them in the arms of grace.
Thanks very much to our threshold singers who will be with us again as the afternoon moves on. I know that there are some in the room who have known John much longer than I have, but I first met John in 1978. And at that time, he was the Crown Prosecutor at Youth and Family Court in Victoria. And I was there as a student probation officer. John could still walk then, although with difficulty, but yeah, he moved around. And I have to say that I was terrified of him. Partly because of the role that he played, but the other reason was because I remember he wore braces, and you would go in to see him in his office to try and convince him that a young person who'd been charged with an offense could be dealt with outside of the formal court process. And he'd be sitting there with his sleeves rolled up and his braces on, looking very official with all sorts of piles of paper around him. And, you know, you really had to make your case. And I remember in particular one occasion when he and the local sitting judge decided that break-in entries had become an epidemic. And they were going to make a mandatory 1 week in custody for any young person so convicted. And it would escalate from there. And all of us went in to see the two of them and plead our case. And I had a colleague who was also a student officer who said, you shouldn't put them in jail, you know, it won't do any good. You may as well send them to the moon. And John said, well, if we had the technology, I'd consider it. So, I mean, that's a side of John that most of us wouldn't know, because when I met him again 4 years later here in the Comox Valley, he had sort of given up his working life, and he was living here in the winter and traveling to Mexico in that van that he had back in the day. And he was kind of like our resident environmentalist, spiritual philosopher type. And I remember all sorts of discussions over meals and drinks and such. And his life as a hard-nosed Crown prosecutor had kind of been left behind him. And but it was a privilege to know John for all those years, to have the chance to meet with him as he got involved in the community, as he became in many ways the voice of accessibility in the Comox Valley, as he reached out to people in positions of authority to encourage them to make the community more comfortable for people to get around who had various challenges. Most people know that he started taking elected officials for scooter tours so that they all knew what it was like to try and get into the washroom at the library or the art gallery. John, my friendship with John carried on over those many years, and we used to get together a few times a year. I would come over with a dinner, and it always followed the same routine. He would grill me on local politics and, you know, all the various things that he was thinking about what was going on in the world and why we couldn't move to proportional representation and things like that. Then we would eat, and then we would play chess. And those were wonderful evenings. I used to beat him fairly regularly, but in recent years, he slaughtered me just about every time. So I owed him a dinner when he left us, and I've offered that dinner to Dawn, and hopefully we get a chance to make good on that before too long. So thanks for letting me share just some of my memories of John and the special being that he was. There's going to be an opportunity towards the end of our day here for anybody who would like to say a few words themselves to speak. And with that, I'd like to call upon Chris Carter, who has a video presentation and is also going to say a few words.
Thank you, Doug. Let's get this down. Doug's so tall, handsome, tall. Good afternoon, everybody. I've known John for quite a while, and I thought before we watch the little video that I put together of some of the slides and so on, or pictures of that he had in a massive amount of filing boxes. But I just thought I'd talk briefly about how I met John. So I first met John while I was walking on the walkway, the Air Park walkway. That's where I first met him, and he zoomed by me on his red scooter, and like Doug said, he was like more or less terrifying. I saw him, he was this upright, strong looking man, and on his scooter, he seemed like he knew exactly what he wanted and where he was going. He was, and I thought, well, I got to get to know this guy. Time passed, and we ended up talking. And we ended up having talks about accessibility, proportional representation, which we got a little video coming up at the end of, halfway through this meeting here. And he just, to me, was so bright and so warm and compassionate, and I just was in awe of him. So time passed. We got to know each other a bit, and we had a mutual friend named Renee Poisson. And Renee was asked by John to maybe put together a little video on proportional representation. And so, but Renee wanted me to come by because that was my profession. So she asked me if I'd be willing to come along. And we did. And there's John, which you'll see in a bit. Again, quite scary, very bright, very warm, very loving, and just a tremendous man. We put this piece together. He had a prepared speech. I think it was 15 pages or something. And I said, okay, that's a good thing, but we're going to modify that right down to next to nothing, which I did, much to his chagrin, I must say. So let's see, where was I? Basically, that's where the friendship really started with me and John, and it's extended from about 2010 right to the last day of his life. And I was there 12 hours before he passed away, and that's an interesting story. I'll maybe do a quick thing on that. Oh, I got a head shake. No, I got my time. I got to keep. We've got a 5-minute time frame here, and I agreed that would happen, and he's going to get cut off here in a minute. Okay, so he and I spent a fair amount of time, me riding my bicycle and him riding his scooter. We came from his place at about 31st and Cliff area around the waterfront, and we would bomb into town, have a cup of tea or coffee, and we would just talk. And we met people. We in fact met the mayor once in a mall, and we had about a 15, 20-minute conversation with him. So yeah, it was a lot of fun riding with him. He could do about 17 kilometers an hour in that scooter. And so it was a chore for me to keep up with him. He also wanted me to bring my neighbor's scooter into town so that he could show the people that the council members that how some of the problems that people with accessibility issues would have. So I ended up bombing into town on that scooter, and met John in town at the art gallery, for example, and we squeezed in, tried to get into that washroom, and it was tough. We couldn't. So they had to do some remodeling, and that was John. He scared everybody. I think that was the thing. And that's why things got done. So he was a really strong advocate. So I've got lots more to say, but I'm not going to say. I won't. I got lots more to say, but I'm not going to. John passed away, and I decided that I would put together a slideshow of pictures that he had. And I found a piece of music that was just incredible, called Going Home. And this is going to be on the video. And so I thought I would risk half of my life in singing the first stanza of that song. So here we go. Going home, going home, I am going home. Quiet like some still day, I'm just going home. It's not far, just close by, through an open door. Work all done, care laid by, going to fear no more. there expecting me, father's waiting too. Lots of folks gathered there, all the friends I knew. Whoa. Okay, so thank you very much. All right, so we're going to present the slideshow. So if we could maybe get the lights there. Thank you.
doorway, and it wasn't there when a lot of you came in. So please try and remember to sign on the way out, and I'll remind you again towards the end. I'd like to invite Anita Adams, John's niece and Don's daughter, to come up and share some words.
Wow. Thank you so much for your beautiful song. I really was moved and I felt embraced by the words, brought tears to my eyes, more than tears to my eyes. I wasn't planning on crying. I'm told to come closer. Is that better? Okay. Thank you to family that are on joining us by Zoom and friends that are joining us by Zoom. All of you for being here today. Really means a lot to Dawn and I and our family to have so many people here that touched John's life, and I know you were touched by his life. When I arrived, there were a bunch of eagles flying over this building, and I couldn't help but to think of John and flying and being free, and then to hear the song just feels so perfect, so perfect. John was more than just an uncle to me. He was a mentor and a friend. I would call him up whenever there was something heavy on my heart, or just, dealing with kids. Awesome, but sometimes challenging when they were little. And John would listen. He was, as you all know, he was a great listener. He would just sit and listen without judgment. And then he would ask you questions to make you think and dig deep and understand and put on another perspective. And you always walked away from conversations with John going, yeah, and feeling better. Have you experienced that? Yeah. Yeah. So awesome. So awesome. He's taught me a lot. A lot. I've learned so much from him. I would love being in his place, and there was always a revolving door of people coming in. I always marveled at that. It's just like, wow, he's got so many people that care and come into his life. A lot of them were the care workers that came, but they weren't just care workers. They were friends who he loved, and they loved him. You could see that. I could feel my body get goosebumps just saying that, because I know it's so true. There was love there with all the relationships he had. People would come, past employees that no longer were working for John, would come and have tea and share conversations, bring food. Oh, the food. I was always grateful for that, because otherwise I would be eating something that John created. And it was always questionable. Like, I still don't know what those little things are that were in. They were a bit of an experiment. I always tried, though. I tried, and they kept getting better, a little bit better every time. I see some heads nodding. He was an experimenter for sure. And that was what was really exciting and interesting about John. He was always trying new things too, right? Like, he made things work, and a way to make things work. Fiercely independent. And yet he also mastered the art of surrender. How did those two go together? But he did make that go together. And he taught me how to be more vulnerable. He had a fall about 15 years ago and broke some bones, and he was in the hospital for a bit. And a lot of people thought that was the end of his fierce independence, that he was going to have to move into assisted living or something. John, he got on the phone, he called me and explained the situation, and I knew that that was my opportunity to step up and help out. He needed somebody to be there for a little while, to move in with him for a little while until he found somebody that could live with him for a period of time while he healed his injury. And I guess on the surface, that looked like I was doing him a favor, but really he was doing me a great service by inviting me into his life in this way. And that's when we really bonded, like really, really got close. And I'm so grateful to him for that opportunity. And that's where I really got to learn about what it means to be vulnerable, what it means to surrender, what it means to be a part of a community and come together. And I'll be forever grateful for that. I remember, I think it was my last day before going back home, and I asked if I could just wash his face, and I started bawling. Because it was so beautiful. And that was for me, not for him. It was for me. It was such a beautiful moment. One of my favorite things about coming to Courtenay to visit John was I would bring my bike, and much like Chris, I would love riding with him. We would go up to Cumberland, and it was such a favorite treat. And he'd always beat me up those hills. And he was so proud of getting up to the top of the hills faster than me. And I would kick his butt going down. And it was just pure joy for both of us to be able to go on these adventures together. And that was what it was. It was an adventure going through the back countries of Courtenay up into Cumberland. So much fun. So much fun. Great, rich conversations. Talking into the late hours of the night. I'm like, I gotta go to bed. But he could just keep going. And he would share so much and ask provocative questions and make me think. I love that. I love that. Incredible human being. Over the last year or so, maybe longer, last couple of years, we actually started talking a lot about death, not in a bad way, just having open conversations about dying. And I'm grateful for that too, because it's okay. I mean, we miss him. I'm sad that he's not physically in my life right now. And yet I feel his presence all around. And it's beautiful. I've got the hand up, and I think that means that my time is up. I see you. Oh, my final thoughts about this is that the vision I have of John right now is dancing, because he did tell me that when he dies, he's going to be dancing. And I see him dancing in the heavens and flying with the eagles. Oh. We are going to have a informal gathering tomorrow at 10 a.m. scattering of his ashes. And anybody that wants to be a part of that, we're going to meet at the Air Park. Is that what it's called? Yeah, the Air Park, 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Nothing formal, and you're all welcome to be a part of that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anita. John was affectionately known as Higgs to many. And Higgs had a lifelong friend since high school, another John Martin. And two of John Martin's children, Selena and Todd, are here today to share on behalf of the family. If they'd like to come up now, please.
My name is Selena Martin, and this is my brother, Todd Martin.
I'll let her go.
We are the children of John Martin, who were one of Higgs' oldest and dearest friends. Hig and my father knew each other since they were in high school, and they shared a love for athletics, academics, and adventure. In terms of athletics, you may be surprised to know that prior to having MD, Hig played high school basketball with my father. This is where they learned to work together as a team. In terms of academics in high school, Hig and my father were both in an accelerated learning program due to their high academic achievement. Later, Hig and my father both went to law school and became lawyers. For those of you who knew Hig, you know that he was an ongoing learner and was fascinated with the latest behavioral trends, psychology, education, and politics. Hig had what I like to call a growth mindset. He was fascinated with learning and always looking for ways to grow and develop. This was a quality that I always admired in him. In terms of adventure, Hig and my father had many adventures together throughout their lifetime. This included traveling across Canada and Europe on merchant ships, trains, scooters, and motorcycles. Our childhood was filled with stories of these two and their many adventures. Hig and my father always had the best sense of humor and were always slightly exaggerated their stories, and they were filled with laughter and embellishments of each event. When my father had children, these two never stopped adventuring together. Hig must have loved adventure, as my dad had 6 children. Hig traveled with us throughout BC and also ventured down to Mexico with us on numerous occasions. He commuted in a teal blue camperized van called Hilda, which was outfitted with a scooter for mobility. My dad also had a camperized van, which was shown in some of the pictures. Looking back on our traveling days with Hig, I'm in complete admiration for his patience, as traveling with all these personalities was no small task. Hig often amused himself by engaging in deep philosophical discussions with us that were way over our head as kids. I remember on one occasion when I was about 7, I hit my sister in anger, and Hig tried to have a one-on-one counseling session with me. He proceeded to ask me a series of deep questions, which included, how did it feel when you hit your sister? The truth is, it felt pretty damn good. But Hig was looking for something a bit deeper. He was wanting to peel back the layers of my psyche to understand why. None of this made sense to me as a child, but it became the norm for us as children growing up with Hig. The truth is that Hig was like a second father to us. He was there for many pivotal moments in my life. Some specific moments include my grade 9 banquet that he drove me to in his van. He also made the incredible journey to come to my wedding, thanks to Phil, who helped him make that journey, because at that time he wasn't very mobile. Hig will be greatly missed by our family, and I hope that he's now traveling in adventures with my father on the other side. We love you, Hig, and you'll be missed.
Hi there. Is that all right? I'm the oldest of the Martin clan, Todd Martin. I also have known Hig as long as you have known Hig, when he was a juvenile prosecutor. Hig raised me like a son. He was a father to me. He taught me so much about life. I was one of the lucky ones that got to travel in that van named Hilda all over North America. Still, when he could even partially walk just with canes, we went on many adventures together. When I was young, I have this great memory of Hig, as he was such a tenacious and such a pioneer. He never let MD get the best of him. One day while my mom was at work, I've always ridden bikes like a lot of you here, and I've got to ride them with Hig on a scooter. But when I was very young, at the age of maybe 8 or 9, I had a terrible bike crash, and I have a great scar on my chin. And Hig was the only one around. And at that time, he was working on the power of the pyramid. He had kept an orange living in a small pyramid for probably 8 weeks or something crazy. So when I came in the house and blood was pouring out of my chin, he proceeded to assemble a balsa wood pyramid in my living room, which I sat in for 2 hours until my mom got home. She quickly explained I should have just gone and got stitches. I never did. I have a scar and it healed, maybe thanks to Hig, but thanks to the power of healing the human body. I have so many stories I could tell about John, but he was such an influence on my life. If you're here, you knew him. It didn't matter if you knew him for 5 minutes or 50 years. You felt like you knew him for 50 years, even after 5 minutes. He just loved the world and he loved everybody. And he was an amazing person to be around. Like Selena, I also had been asked that question so many times in my life. How did that make you feel? He was like having an in-house psychiatrist in the Martin family.
Yeah.
And he'll be greatly missed by everyone here, but truly missed by myself and my family and my kids that have got to know him so well. I'll miss the days of riding a bike with him and that scooter. He used to come to Cumberland as well. My kids and I raced BMX bikes, and he'd make that journey on race days to come and watch and see us race there. And usually on that weekend, we'd stay and I'd go for a bike ride with him. I love you, Hig. You'll be greatly missed. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Todd and Selena. If we didn't know already, we're understanding that one of John's many gifts was the gift of friendship. And that brings us to inviting up Susan Higginbotham. Sue and John were married for 10 years and then remained good friends for 43 years after that. So Susan, if you'd like to come up now.
So I am really not quite that wicked ex-wife, right? Can you hear me? Yeah, anyway. Whoop. Golly. So thank you all for coming today. I know John felt so supported by you, his friends. Thank you too to all the folk for the planning and the bringing together of this celebration of life for John. Much, much appreciated. Whoops. And a special welcome to my dear partner, Lenore, who visited John with myself many times since 1998. Can't hear? That better? All right. And to our dear friend, Gloria, who has remained friends with John since 1975, when we first met in Nanaimo. I was asked to give a short narrative of our time together. So I've tried to keep it brief, but I know the hand will go up if I'm too lengthy, right? First of all, I want to say John was one of the most amazing people. He was a real super trooper. John was born in Vancouver in East Van. For his high school years, he attended Britannia High. When I met John in 1969, he had been teaching in Smithers before moving to Vancouver. We first met at the Aquatic Center on Pacific Boulevard in Vancouver. I was treading water in the pool, and I noticed this fellow walking up on the diving board, and I watched him dive, and he did a jackknife, and I thought, oh my God, it was stupendous. I was quite taken aback, so I swam over to him and congratulated him on his dive. And so that was the beginning of John and Susan. And shortly thereafter, we started to date. When I told John I had had a previous lesbian relationship, he said, so? Okay. During our early dating, John shared how he rode his bike to work, had been on ski patrol, how he and his brother Don, before tow lines came into being, would climb up Cyprus on their skis. I recall one of our early dates. I arrived late for the date. John was sitting on the floor with his arms crossed, and he looked at me and he said, my time is ever as important as your time. And I went, right. Another time, I arrived at John's for dinner, and he was in his bedroom on the second floor. And I watched him, he tripped on the stairs. And I thought, that's funny, he couldn't save himself. And he fell all down those set of stairs. However, I didn't really think much of it at the time. Eventually, John and I started living together on McDonald Street in Kitsilano. It was a crazy flower power day, so during our time on Kitsilano rather, we went skiing, and I noticed how John's balance was a bit off. Then at some point, I saw how his trousers at the back were sagging. I was an RN at the time and asked to see John's backside. It was obvious there was quite a bit of gluteal muscle loss. I said he needed to see his GP, who on seeing John referred him to the neurologist. I went with John to that appointment, and when he came out from the appointment with the neurologist, the tears were running down. And he said, I have muscular dystrophy, pelvic limb girdle. And he said, the neurologist said to me, did your GP tell you? And that's how John found out. He was all of 24 years old. So life went on, and in 1971, we got married. And shortly thereafter, we began to realize we both wanted a more rural kind of life, and we decided to move to Clearbrook. John applied for a teaching job in Cranbrook. I read his letter, and if school values are the same as mine, I would be happy to have an interview. I said, John, do you think you're going to get a job there? Anyway, he was given a part-time teaching job in carpentry. And I brought this to show you. This is one of his pieces that he made. Okay. Halfway through our stay in Cranbrook, after much discussion, John decided to apply to law school in Dalhousie, Nova Scotia. He was accepted, and so with Pip, our newly acquired pup, and our new Toyota, we traveled across Canada, camping all the way. On arrival in Halifax, we rented an apartment very close to Dal. It was on the 17th floor. We had good times in Halifax. I recall John's St. Margaret's Bay, sitting on a rock with his sketch pad drawing. We traveled to PEI, walked along Cavendish Beach, went to the Anne of Green Gables, went all through Cape Breton and the beautiful fall colors, many lobster feasts with university friends, Peggy's Cove. We visited weekly Lawrencetown, where Pip stayed on a farm. We had beautiful walks along the ocean. I remember one day in Halifax waiting with John at traffic lights. I looked at him and had this feeling of sheer joy and happiness. 1975 was John's final year of law school. His final paper was to be submitted. And he looked at me and said, I'm not doing it. I said, oh, right. So we all waited. Dal gave John an extension on the time a paper was due, and it eventually happened. We returned to Nanaimo where John did his articles. We bought a small sailboat and had many lovely days out on the water. On the day of admission to the bar, John told me he was going alone to the Philippines for healing for 2 months. Apparently, at that time in the Philippines, there was some kind of healing with chicken wings, or I can't quite recall, but something like that anyway. Then he went on to Montreal for more healing, and his last healing stop was to stay in the cabin in Souk. And by the time we returned to stay in the cabin, our relationship was faltering, and eventually we parted, only to reunite a few months later. We moved to Collingwood, and John secured position as Crown Prosecutor in Victoria. John at that time, unfortunately, was having difficulty navigating the steps to the legislature, and he told me how people made fun of him, thinking he was inebriated. Of course, most upsetting for John. I just could not get back on track with our relationship and said that I needed to separate, which we did, and divorced in 1980. I left Collingwood and went to Victoria, as did John, and Pip stayed with John. After a few months of unpleasantness, we reunited when Pip was killed by a car. John called to tell me, and I suggested that he bring Pip over to Salt Spring to my place. And he and John brought Pip over, and we buried Pip. And John and I remained good friends ever since. Shortly after losing Pip, John retired from law, saying it was too aversive for him. He was offered a judgeship, but after much thought, he refused. In 1997, John moved to Courtenay and oversaw the building of his house. He planned and designed equipment and spaces for future disabilities. Throughout John's trips in his van, on his return, he would always stop in Burnaby to visit with me and would bring a gift from his travels. We always had a good chat about his adventures. When I'd visit John in Courtenay, there would be a dish full of my favorite candy. We loved to go outside, and I would ride a bike, and John would be on his scooter as we went along the estuary, where John would encounter his many friends, and we often went to Tim Hortons for coffee and a treat. When visiting John, he was very good with instructions, assisting with dressing, getting on and off a scooter, and John getting into his bed. When I screwed up, often, John was ever so patient. Always amazed at John's innovative ways of dealing with his MD. I will always remember John for his amazing strength and resilience, his bravery and courage as he navigated through progressive MD, his determination to keep as well as possible, his kindness and generosity to family and friends, his philosophy and ethics, and his values that led him to work so hard for equality and justice for all. And over time, I saw a more soft and gentle John develop. He started to explore more inner being and the paths to gain more self-compassion and spirituality. Finally, I will always remember his kindness. When in 2020, I was diagnosed with cancer. After my surgery and throughout my chemo, John phoned every day. John phoned me just 2 days before he passed, and for that call, I will ever be grateful. And may you rest in peace, dear John. Okay. Oh, thank you.
Thanks so much, Sue. And we're going to hear again from the Threshold Singers.
I am sending love to heal you, to hold you. I am sending you love to hold you. I am sending you to hold you in love. No matter where you go, no matter where you've been, you'll never walk alone. I feel you deep within. I am sending you light to you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love. No matter what you feel or what you choose to show, I'm always there for you. So I want you to know I am sending you light to feel you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love. I walk the path with you. Go slow, dear one, don't hurry. I'll go just like you go. There is no need to worry. I am sending you light to feel you, to hold you. I am sending you light to hold you in love. Sweet, sweet dreams, just on the other side of the dream of precious dreams. Sweet, sweet dreams, sweet, sweet dreams, just on the other side of the dream of precious dreams. Sweet, sweet dreams, sweet, sweet dreams, just on the other side of the dream of precious dreams. Sweet, sweet dreams, sweet, sweet dreams, just on the other side of the dream of precious dreams. Sweet, sweet dreams, sweet, sweet dreams, just on the other side of the dream of precious dreams.
Thank you again, Threshold Singers. Catherine Fraser was introduced to Higgs by Linda and John Martin 40 years ago. Catherine and John lived and traveled together as partners for 10 years and maintained a close friendship since. And we'd like to invite Catherine to step up and share some words with us now.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is that okay? Yeah? All right. Oh, I'm all aflutter. Thank you for the music and the words that have been said so far. For the last month, I've been reminiscing on the past, reflecting on the present, and surprisingly, come to this moment of sharing. With John, I signed up for mystery, surprises, adventure, and creativity. I was working and he was newly retired. Descriptive words: intelligent, individualistic, independent, edgy, charming, learning to adapt, exciting, romantic, serious, lover, lover of nature, science, engineering, spirituality, philosophy, interest in learning, playful, childlike, strategic, humorous, and at ease. Words of appreciation are many. Inner and outer adventurer, tenacious. Admired his creativity, his grit, his persistence, perseverance, and forward thinking. Humor, figuring things out, helper, and humanistic. Our woven fabric together was to learn to be non-reactive, embrace the unknown, and do the dance of intimacy, of not too close and not too far, embracing the fear of abandonment and inundation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about traveling with John in his 3 vans, and maybe briefly allude to the scooters. With his annual snowbird adventures, we had meetups with the Martins in San Diego and visited with Mickey, traveled to visit Dick and Betty Jean in Chico, California, went to Palm Springs, Palm Desert, Los Angeles, Pismo Beach, La Paz, meeting Raimondo and his family, and who is a Spanish teacher, the Northern Peninsula of Sonora, Baja California, Tucson, Yuma, Sedona, Iowa, Utah, Winnipeg, Courtenay, Edmonton, Comox, Victoria, and Vancouver. Traveling in John's 3 vans pre-911. So I'm hoping to take you on a ride, so hold your hats for the next few minutes. We traveled together and we stayed in campers and in casas on destinations. I took holidays and extended leave of absence to do longer trips. I would often fly down and drive back and vice versa. Security was always suspect. I had a one-way ticket with no fixed address on destination to meet up with John in his van. Flying during the Iraq War with bomb scares at airports and terminal changes, and John was always at the destination to meet me. We learned about many things: the Siskiyous in winter, Palm Springs ordinance, no parking or resting within city limits. Stopped by police one night at a roadside sleepover in Pismo Beach to be awakened with a microphone, say, "Come out with your hands up," and asked me whether I was under duress. One time in Mexico on a long isolated road, we were suddenly stopped by the Green Beret, and they demanded that we get out of the van while they searched. At the end, everything was in upheaval. Border crossings were always tension producing, and he would ask me to be quiet, and he would take care of things. We were lucky. It all worked out. My heart beat very fast during those times of uncertainty. When we traveled, I was shy and introverted, and he insisted I talk to 1 stranger a day. Unbeknownst to me, he had developed a habit on his journeys previously, probably with the Martins and with John, traveling down the Interstate 5 when settling for the night. He stopped at a trucker stops or cruised the posh areas of cities. One of my favorite places to stop was La Jolla, California, near San Diego. After cruising the streets and neighborhoods, sometimes for 2.5 hours, he eventually stopped outside a mansion with a high wall and would park and sleep for the night. He thought I was very flexible and generous, and I actually felt quite scared. Initially, sleeping was impossible while John slept soundly while I was on night duty. There was the time traveling when John bought a new van in Arizona, and we drove in tandem to Vancouver Island. One of the challenges was wanting to go off in the left lane, but there were 5 lanes of traffic between to get over to the left lane. And luckily in the States, they're very systematic when they drive. And we made it to our destinations in Vancouver. In the Redwood Forest, we had some near misses with ongoing traffic when I dove down to the brake or raised my voice for Hig to move faster to avoid oncoming traffic. And then in Palm Desert, we spent time with Hilda applying electrician's tape to holes on side of and undersurface of the van. And then we were to spray paint it with purple, not purple, turquoise paint. She held together a little longer, and I was covered in the turquoise paint. Also, it was very hot often when we would come back, it'd be 120-degree temperatures, and he insisted that the windows could not be open, just in case I was not there, and they were left open. So with Hilda, the other van, the other ones had some air conditioning, we resorted to using squirt bottles to cool down, and that was actually quite fun and playful. There was a time searching for his third van he called Moosie Joe, drawing plans, designing, rebuilding. The interior was beautiful and looked like inside of a boat, and a lot of you had the opportunity of experiencing that van. John always wanted to be in the driver's seat and wanted to take care of things. As this is sounding like a travel log, I will stop that and you'll get the idea how important movement, mobility, and adapting to new things and environments was for him. John's ultimate dream, or van dream, was to own a Mercedes van. The closest he got to that was we would buy lottery tickets, and he had a tour of one when someone was parked on the travels, and he would carry a picture of the van that he cut out at the newspaper. So if anybody knows of any Mercedes vans, he was very interested. Fond memories of romantic John, of invitations to sit up front on waking and watching the sunrises and sunsets. Sometimes he would light a candle during conversations or over dinner. We would see meteors or falling stars and constellations in the night skies in Mexico, especially Concepcion Bay, as well as the Courtenay Walkway, and they're memorable. Oh, right. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about scooters. Oh my, well, and basically the scooter that I remember, which is a little different from some of your scooter walks, is that we were in Rancho Mirage in the Baja California, and his battery died. The scooter was heavy, as was he, and being pushed in the sand was no easy task. We made it back in the dark. He had to go across the border to get new batteries. He told me funny moments and awkward moments when traveling with John Martin and went to a washroom and leaned on the sink and for support, and it fell off the wall and water was everywhere. And the owner was apologizing profusely, or jumping the freight trains, as the Martins have already mentioned about travels in Canada and Europe in between studies. John was a curious man, loved to learn, explore, and figure things out. He studied the Course of Miracles and said he was ordained to marry people. We went to prayer workshops and visited health faith communities. He continued research for a cure of muscular dystrophy, and he bargained with his muscular dystrophy that if it could cure himself, he would deal with it. We visited a geneticist in California called Stephen, who also had another form of muscular dystrophy. And all his brothers also did. So they had long conversations. He spoke to stem cell researchers as well as trips to Edmonton in Eastern Canada and Montreal to discuss the forms of his condition, both from psychological and physical perspectives, exploring alternative therapies and healings. The will to live is strong. Yeah. We won't talk about Higgs foodisms. So I'm grateful for our times together and apart, our interests in travel, art and science, philosophy, spiritualities, and threads of interest. He encouraged my art making and I learned to paint, but sometimes he made jewelry on request. We helped each other artistically, and he developed my first website from scratch. When I was sad, he would say, or when he would go to do his traveling, he would say, oh, go and make art and you'll feel better. So I created this picture that's up here called Say It With Feeling. And indeed, I did feel better afterwards. I just want to conclude with his competitive nature about games. Some of you had many games with him. Well, one trip we came up and he brought Tetris, Pac-Man, and Mario. And so John and my mother would stay up all night until he won. And my mother had a trigger finger. He had many hats, his railway hat, his Spanish and French berets, his Tilly hats that had been adjusted and made specially by Linda and other people, the Parker and Blue Brown Baron hat, day hats, night hats. He showed his strong and vulnerable side, and I was often there for when he had a health crisis with cancer in his ear, prostate surgery, or recently his artery, the stint in his artery in his leg. He always wanted to better himself and please me. Just want to conclude. So I just want to, I've got lots here, but I want to just do two poems that I found recently. One is by a Scottish poet, Robert Randall. And it says, "But John, have you seen the world?" said he. "Trains and tramcars and 60-seaters, cities and lands across the sea, Giotto's Tower and the dome of St. Peter's? No, but I've seen the arc of the earth from the Bursay shore and the Courtenay River Rockway, like the edge of a planet, and the lifeboat plunge through the Pentland Firth to cosmic tide with the men that man it." Dear Hig, I'm grateful, and grateful for all our connections. So I'd like to just conclude with this last one called, "May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warmly upon your face. The rains fall soft on your fields. Until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand." Some of you may have seen the picture of outstretched palm in the picture in his bedroom. And it was bought during a garage sale when we were furnishing an apartment for him in Pismo Beach in California. Blessings.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to our valiant Judy at the back holding her hand up in vain. Catherine did tell me that if she read really fast, she could do it in 5 minutes, but you had a lot of material, so. I don't believe Reverend Marg Meisner has been able to make it today. Would you like me to bring a microphone over, Judy? Okay. Yeah. And Judy, if you can just introduce yourself, please.
My name is Judy Norbury, and I've been a friend of John's for probably 1998, because I see that that's when the accessibility committee was started. And so this is kind of complicated. Mark Meisner was to read this, but she was to read this letter, this little writing that came from Heather Price, who was the person to start the first accessibility committee. So this is from Heather. Remembering John Higginbotham Celebration. I'm very honored to have been asked to say a few words about John on behalf of the Comox Valley Accessibility Committee. John is a very special person. I was one of the organizers way back in 1998 when the Accessibility Committee was started, and John was one of the first people to volunteer his time. The goals of the committee were to educate and raise awareness around accessibility issues, and to advocate for improved accessibility throughout the community. John threw himself passionately into all aspects of this work. And this was very important work. For example, at that time, the building code did not require visual as well as auditory fire alarms. It did not require that all exits be accessible, only the main exit. It did not consider medical scooters to be assistive devices for indoor locations. John knew how important these things were, important not only for safety, but also for enabling everyone to be included in all parts of the vibrant life of Comox Valley. John and his trusty scooter could be seen regularly around town, checking out sidewalk letdowns, parks and trails, and shops and offices. The committee was so lucky to have him. John always preferred to show people why things needed to be changed rather than lecture. And there was nothing he enjoyed more than to brainstorm for simple, practical solutions. He was always patient and respectful, and he used to say, listening is part of problem solving. One time I remember we had gone to a little office in an older building. Someone had complained to the committee that the building was not really accessible because the floor was too heavy and awkward. Well, While we all brainstormed with the building owner standing outside and checking out everything, we realized that changes in this older building would be tough and time-consuming. John sat on his scooter and looked at everything, listened to the discussion, and then said, "Hey, while we're waiting for Reynolds, as everyone can get to the door, even I can get to the door. So, could we just put in a doorbell? Then staff come and open the door." Everyone stood stunned for a minute, and then we all laughed. Yes, indeed, apparently a doorbell could easily and quickly be installed. Some solutions just require someone like John to see them. Another time, John checked out a new trail in town that had a boardwalk. He reported back to the committee, "This is a great trail," he said, "but there's no place a scooter can turn around, or where a bike or stroller can pass me. We need a puller." John immediately set up to make the necessary calls. He knew everybody in town. And at the very next meeting, he reported back, "There's a nice pull out on that trail now. I pulled up yesterday to get a drink of water, and a family group with a stroller passed me. Then 3 people with dogs, and some cyclists, and a couple of joggers." He laughed and added, "I've always said if something works for everybody, if something works for everybody, it really works better for everybody." We all gave John a high five. That's what John was like, hardworking, dedicated, and creative, and he achieved so much, despite the increasing demands of muscular dystrophy. One last story. John and the committee worked for quite some time with the dedicated staff of the CDRD to put a wheelchair accessible fire at Goose Pit. The time came to check it out, and it worked very well. Pictures were taken, happy conversations all around. About a week later, I got a call, so I reported this to the next accessibility meeting. A physio I knew called me saying a woman, one of her clients, had commented on the new accessible fire pit at the pit. Her client was so happy she had just been there for Father's Day. It was the Father's Day tradition for that family to all get together, many generations, and have a fire barbecue at Goose Pit. This year, the granddad had just got back from Victoria. He had cancer after his treatment and surgery and was in a wheelchair. Family was desperate that this get together would never be the same, which was especially important this year, recognizing that life is precious and short. But wait, they were able to continue this tradition because of that new and accessible fire pit. They were able to celebrate the dads and the granddads and all the family together roasting hot dogs and watching evening come to the pit. Everyone was quiet for a minute after I reported this. Then John spoke up. "Well, that's what it's all about, isn't it?" It was a wonderful community, and often shared jokes and frustrating stories, but also we shared many stories too. A few words can hardly convey John's contribution to our community. I feel fortunate to have known and worked with John those many years. His good humor, interest, and dedication were a wonderful asset to the accessibility community, and his life will be a continuing inspiration to all of us. Thank you. Heather Price, coordinator of the Courtenay Valley Accessibility Committee from 1998 to 2015. So that would say everything that I would say anyway, because our committee continues, and several people from the committee, the hard workers, are in this group. So I'll pass this on. I know, see, don't worry, I will go on. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Judy. And I feel obliged to give a little bit of a warning. There's an open mic that's scheduled towards the last part. It's going to be much less time than available because we do have to be wrapped up by 3:30. So I just want to let you know that in advance. If you do have to leave early, please remember to sign the guest book on your way out. Thank you. And we'll ask Karen Parkinson to come up now. Karen is a caregiver representative, and she's going to share on behalf of John's home support team.
Hi, everyone. Looks better when I have my back to you all. um, I am going to do my best to share some thoughts and closer. No, I'm going to do my best to share some thoughts and sentiments that I've consolidated about John on behalf. Can everyone hear me okay? On behalf of his home support caregiving team. So I believe he began receiving home care about 20 years ago while he was still able to walk using support devices. And then about, I'm hearing different things, maybe 13 to 15 years ago, after he had a bad fall and his need for home support increased, his team expanded. But many of his home support teams were friends that stepped up into these roles. And now I've learned that Anita was one of those people. The amazing thing about John is that if you were not his friend yet when you met him or started working for him, you became friends. He was so good at building genuine connections with people in all areas of his life. He was genuinely interested, and he cared for everyone in his life. As a home support worker, you would think that you would be going to work to provide to provide support to somebody, but inevitably John provided as much attention, care, and support to each of us individually and personally as we did to him. It was more like time with John than it was a job, and time that we all treasured. He would always want to spend much time catching up with each of us, wanting to hear how we were doing, inquiring about our joys and our dreams, our challenges and our struggles, our passions and our stories. He was a very caring friend, much like a wise uncle or a fatherly figure to many of us. He had a heart of gold and a playful sense of humor, playing jokes on us at times. He saw talents in us and encouraged us by saying things like, "You won't be working for me very long. You need to be a writer," or "You need to be a lawyer." He had much more confidence in our various talents than we often did. He also said he liked to live vicariously through us, supporting us to take time off to do things like go fight the fight at Fairy Creek or travel to various places around the world. Environmental protection and social justice, political reform, and travel were all passions of his, and he supported our passions too. He also supported many of us through our own struggles like cancer treatments or heart surgery, divorce, or the loss of our loved ones. He was so generous. He was so generous with his care, and he never complained about his own situation. I can't see. He did complain about government stuff. But he always, I can't even see because I'm crying. But he also said, he always said he was blessed with a good life and grateful that he wasn't suffering. Being a boss is not an easy job. And being a boss when you are also the client can usually only make it more difficult. John hired and managed his own support team, and he did it with such grace and compassion and generosity. He also built close, caring relationships with each of us. Sometimes when there's multiple roles such as this, the lines can get blurry and the waters of the relationship can get murky. But with John, the waters were always clear and full of unconditional love. The communications were always open and full of respect and unwavering acceptance for us. He showed us all how to build genuine connections and lifelong relationships. He inspired us in so many ways. His constant pursuit of learning and personal growth, his innovativeness, his independence, his commitment to family and friends, his activism, and his positive perspective. We all feel blessed and grateful to have had him in our lives and to have been part of his life. In his turn in health and his passing came quick and was a shock to many. We will all miss him dearly, and we send our love and condolences to all of you, his friends and his family. We love you, Higgs. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. It's time for John's Fair Vote video. And looks like Chris is going to hit the lights. As has been mentioned several times, John had a passion for a new form of government. He wrote all sorts of material on it, spoke to many people about it, wrote letters, and I believe this video will speak to that.
I refer to this presentation as Occupy Electoral Reform for the 99%. Can we engage the 99 in national and provincial decision-making processes by reforming our electoral system? And can we devise a reformulated electoral system that will truly empower the 99%? We will only discover the answers to these questions if we explore the possibilities and find the courage to make changes. And we must, because in the recent Canadian federal election of 2011, the Conservative Party won a majority of seats with less than 26% of the eligible voters using our first-past-the-post electoral system. In reformulating our electoral system, there are 4 topics that are particularly urgent. These 4 topics will become a major part of serious conversations in the hundreds of venues where Occupy Wall Street is being expressed. Some system of proportional representation is necessary to enable the diversity of voices in Canada to be heard and considered. A common outcome of proportional representation systems is that no single party wins a clear majority. Without a clear majority for a single party, all legislation must be thoroughly examined and debated according to the perspectives of the different parties. This often means that parties must cooperate in order to craft legislation that enhances the well-being of all. Cooperation amongst and within peoples of different experiences, different cultures, different perspectives is the critical next stage in our social evolution.
Thank you, and we're going to ask our threshold singers to lead us singing Amazing Grace.
How sweet the sound that saved a soul like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to beat, and grace my fears relieved. How precious is that grace appeared. Beyond my thirst relieved. When we live 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know there's things to sing God's praise. And when we first behold, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a soul like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see.
Well, thank you to the Threshold Singers, and thank you to everyone for sticking with us. This is a long event. But the organizers did want there to be a little bit of opportunity for people to say some words, and so I'm going to give that opportunity to about 3 or 4 people. So unless it's really tugging at your heart, I'd ask you to let it pass by. Our first person, though, I know has a lot of things tugging at his heart today, and that's our Mayor Bob Wells.
Thanks very much, Doug. And yeah, I'm feeling quite emotional today, to be fair. But John, I didn't know John nearly as long as a lot of people. About 9 years ago, I was complaining about government, funny enough. And John had a good ear for that. And was one of many people who said that I should probably step up and put my feet where my mouth is and get some stuff done if I could. But on a more personal note, beyond the politics and you know, and really it's so intertwined. I was one of many, many, many elected officials that got to go on the scooter tour. And again, just to really see how passionate he was and how much he really wanted to make sure we understood really from the ground up what the challenges were and really what the solutions were as well. But the last thing I'm just going to share, because I know we want to move on to other folks, is most of my visits with John were actually with my children. And my daughter, when I introduced John to her, and I explained that, you know, she was a twin and special needs, and we were told that she wouldn't be able to walk or ride bikes or ski or all those kinds of things. But unfortunately, we had already done those things, and she was already able to. And it was really uplifting to get that perspective from John. And as you may know, I'm a bit of a geek, but bit of a on all sorts of levels. And just to see how he had modified his home, and it was really exciting for me to be able to go through and spend the time with him and my children, really, to see how he'd modified things to make it, you know, his home, place where he could live in place and age in place, and at the end of the day, just all around an amazing and inspirational person. So thankful. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Mayor Bob. And I made a goof because Anita has reminded me that she has a letter to read. So come on up again, Anita.
I'd like to share a letter that was sent to us by John's cousin, a feisty, lovely woman in Ottawa. And here's what she has to say. I feel like Don, and particularly John Higginbotham, have always been part of my life. When my Aunt Helen, a lovely and funny woman, as many of you may remember, went to Vancouver to deliver Johnny, Don stayed with my mother and grandmother, his grandmother too, and me in our tiny Calgary apartment. And then I shortly went to give Helen a hand with the new baby and an active toddler in Vancouver. I had the great pleasure to feel like John's second mom. We stayed in close touch over the years, though often from a distance. But when my husband was stationed in Chilliwack in the 60s, it was great because we got to spend more time as families together. My boys remember going crabbing on Vancouver beaches with Art and his boys, back when with just a net, you could catch huge Alaska king crabs and cook them on the beach. And in later years, the four boys reveled in occasional trips to the prawn palace, where four growing appetites could overindulge in all-you-could-eat prawns. Johnny and I talked on the phone regularly. It was rare that we would go for more than just a couple of weeks without speaking. Often just small talk, but really a chance to stay up to date on each other's lives and our family lives. But seeing him in person meant a lot. John loved his independence, and being able to move around was so important to him. His trips south often took him through Boise, where he had a raft of aunts and cousins who always enjoyed his visits. As John's mobility declined, we made sure to visit him. For years, Ken and I, usually with our Chilliwack friend, Pat Booth, who always loved him, would make an annual trip to Courtenay. These turned into family reunions. Over the years, most of the Boise cousins came to Courtenay at least once, and many came more than once, notably June and Casey. All three of the Ferguson sisters participated, from Calgary and Saxville, New Brunswick, with Diane, a regular. After Ken's passing, Rick came annually, and my Don came too when he could, and Anita joined us as well. These were special occasions, as it was really only Johnny who could draw the whole family together. he and Dawn always hosted a dinner featuring a feast of Dawn's oyster pate, fresh crab, and John's special crunchy salad. And they'd sometimes torture newbies by having them whip cream for dessert with only a spoon as a beater, as the beater was out of service. Thank you, Joy, for sharing your story with us, and thank you.
And our last reading, Karen, from someone who was unable to be here.
Hello again. Oh, so thank you, Anita, for reading that from Joy. And I believe they're on Zoom with us right now. And also, this is a letter from Phoebe, a dear old friend of John's who is with us on Zoom, so not able to share in person. And it's written in the first person. So I'm going to be saying I, but it's not me, it's Phoebe. So it says, John and I met when I was doing my articles with the Attorney General's office in Victoria. He was a prosecutor for juvenile court, and I was doing a month-long stint in his department. We hit it off. We became lovers, and when that was over, fast friends. The relationship lasted for 44 years. We liked to debate pretty much anything. John was one of the few people I have met in this life who truly listened and thought about what you were saying when you disagreed with him. No matter how passionate the argument, he never seemed to feel threatened by disagreement, and he never took things personally. When I met him, he had a slight imbalance in his walk. That was the only evidence of his muscular dystrophy. He knew it was progressive and that medical science was pretty much clueless in terms of stopping it. And because he believed it was genetic, he gave up on the idea of having children. And even if it hadn't been, he didn't want to father a child who would have to grow up with a parent who couldn't be able to lift them or run with them, someone who was physically compromised. Strangely, after his dog Pip died, he wouldn't get another one for the same reason. He was stubborn. There was no changing his mind. As the disease progressed, John would wonder out loud to me how he was going to deal with not being able to do things, how he was going to cope with being forced to depend on others. He was a bit worried about that, being such a fiercely independent person. And as you all know, he did everything he could to figure out how to maintain that independence for as long as he could. He was amazingly creative, curious, and obsessive. The combination allowed him to modify his van and build his home in such a way to minimize the extent to which his growing disability impacted his life. Every new challenge was met with curiosity and a passion for problem solving. As for his relationships to people, it's hard to put into words, but he was such a great source of comfort and acceptance to those who knew him. Maybe it was his curious, non-judgmental approach to others, or his ability to truly listen, but he gave people the sense of being singularly valued and accepted. I always told him he had a sort of deep, almost paternal energy that caused others to feel cared for and safe in his presence. He seemed baffled by that, but happy that he could offer something of value. This is important, she says. John did not begrudge having had the disease, nor did he feel bitter or resentful about how it changed his life. Although he wouldn't have chosen it, he told me on several occasions, that's her, that he understood what it had done for him, how it had made him a more open, accepting, compassionate person. He told me that as an adolescent and a young man, he had been a sort of a bully, and that he was impatient with those who were not as smart or as capable as he was. He saw and valued how the disease had forced him to slow down and allow others to help him, and had given him the ability to open up to people and to trust them. We all know how loving he was. He didn't see it, but we all know. John had told me several times in the past year that he was getting tired of fighting his body. I sensed that his work here was nearly done and thought that he might be leaving fairly soon. However, when I saw him in May, this last May, he was filled with such life force that it didn't seem possible. The events that took him were so quick, but then I think that's what he would have wanted. So when I was visiting John this past May, feeling that he might be leaving soon, I said to him, if you leave, you need to come and visit me before you vanish. And I think she's talking like in the otherworldly sense. When I got the text saying that John had passed at 6 something in the morning, I immediately had this image of him in the upper left-hand corner of my visual field. This is where I see folks who have passed. He was on his scooter and going really fast, yelling, "Wee!" And I felt this very strong sense, joy and freedom, no sorrow. Although God knows I'll miss him, just joy. And not because he's now free of suffering. In all the 44 years that I knew him, he did not suffer. Yes, occasionally he got sad or discouraged or depressed, more because of politics than because of his personal situation. But he wasn't a person who suffered. He didn't have time. He was too busy exploring spirituality and technology and advances in medicine, too busy learning hypnosis and playing with his 3D printer, too busy being appreciative for his life and for all of us. If, as I believe, we choose the circumstances of our lives to allow us the opportunity to evolve as spiritual beings, John could not have done a better job. Such a lovely man, such a joyful and compassionate presence. We are so blessed to have him in our hearts. Phoebe.
And some will remember Phoebe practicing law in the Valley here for many years, a champion of women and family issues. We're near the end of our time. I want to thank everyone who has shared today. I want to thank everyone who's come and contributed. I want to thank the people who organized and set up the event and who will be here tidying it up afterwards. I encourage you to sign the guest book on the way out, to give a hug to each other, to come and say hello to family and friends. And I'd like to invite Mavis up to close us, please.
I don't know how to. There we go. How's that? Perfect. Thumbs up. Okay. I have had the, I guess I want to say, pleasure of witnessing these events over my short life. And it never see. I'm always amazed at the irony in coming to a celebration of life at the end of someone's life, and you learn so much about them. And it's been a treasure to learn more about John through your stories. So thank you. Yes. Oh, there I am at the closing. Yay. Oh, if you guys read the program, wink, wink, some of you may have noted that there are cookies to be handed out. Feasting is an important piece of community celebrations as it helps to bring closure to the event and it brings us together, like signing the book. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So as this celebration comes to a close, we invite you to please take a cookie. There are caregivers going around right now, or they are holding them, I see. And take a couple. You can choose to eat it now or later, or you might choose not to eat it at all. Whatever you choose to do with it, in the act of it, please think of John. It's hard for me to say if these were his favorite cookies, but Joanna, who made them for him every week, it seems as he liked them. So eat it, offer it, save it, but do it in remembrance of old John. And noting that we're days out from our nation's third National Truth and Reconciliation holiday this Saturday, it might resonate with you, this act of acknowledging life and the land that you're in. And it can be done uniquely to where you wake up that day. And I know that John would be doing so in his own way on that day as a Canadian citizen. Masicho, I say thank you in Anishinaabe. Thank you. These little square cookies are turmeric cookies. and they have lots of different spices and whatnot in them. And they were one of John's favorites that we would feed him as caregivers in the, well, whenever he asked for them. I think he nibbled on them all day. And lastly, I just want to share a personal story. When I came to work for John or with John and provide his care for him, it was maybe my third shift. I worked just on Sunday mornings because that's all I could do for my life at the time. And so the third shift, I think I was leaving my house early in the morning. I had my moccasins on, and I thought, well, I'm going from one house to another house. I'll keep my moccasins on. Should be fine. I'm inside the house. And I didn't take very long to learn that moccasins are not supportive shoes for providing personal care to individuals. So I thought, well, not going to do that again. It didn't take also very long for John to notice my moccasins. They had very shiny beadwork done on the vamp, the upper part of it. And he said, his eyes kind of got like, oh, he lit up. And he says, I really like your moccasins. And I looked down, I said, oh, thank you. And then he proceeded to share with me. And I got such a kick out of this when he said it. He said, I was really mad at my parents when I was a young kid. And I was like, oh yeah, what got you mad at them? He says, well, I was mad at them because I wasn't Indigenous. And to a little kid, that's adorable. And to an adult, it's even more adorable because he had that real curiosity and that childlike look in everything that he did. And I heard it throughout everybody speaking today. And so this feasting and the food that you're enjoying or perhaps going to enjoy later is a real important part of these celebrations. And from what I understood in learning about John, food was very important to him. He loved food. He liked food that was gross, and he liked food that was not good for him. So the spectrum of it was awesome. And I really appreciate the spectrum that he was. So thank you. All my relations. Thank you.
That brings our afternoon to a close. Go with love in your hearts and bless our dear friend John and his spirit. We will remember him. Thank you.